Air Force pilots could have up to 420,000 reasons to stay in the service. The service is raising the bonuses it's paying to pilots who re-up. General Larry Spencer, U.S. Air Force retired, former Vice Chief of the Air Force. General, thanks for coming on. It's great to see you again. What do you make of the size and the terms of the bonuses that the Air Force will offer pilots?
Well, I actually think it's a good idea. When you think of, the Air Force, and frankly, the country writ large, right now is struggling with a pilot shortage. And the Air Force has had this problem off and on over the years. So this is certainly not unusual to offer a bonus. To use a sports analogy, there are 11 folks on a football team, but there's only one quarterback. And that quarterback, even though you need all 11, a quarterback is paid a little more than a guard, as an example. In the Air Force, pilots are the ones that, they have very specialized skills. They put themselves at risk. They are very expensive. They're training. And so they're the tip of the spear, if you will, when we go into harm's way. So to offer bonuses to keep that valuable skill in the Air Force, I think is money well spent. And frankly, I think it actually saves money over time, because if those pilots were to separate and you'd have to start the pipeline all over again, you're going to spend a lot more money. So I think it's a good idea, and I think the Air Force is on the right track.
Is that number knowable, Larry? Is there a way to put a definitive number on the amount of money that the force saves by keeping somebody in, as opposed to having to turn around and feed that funnel again?
Yeah, that's a good question, and because there's really not a good answer. If you try to apply, which I have tried to do, some analytical rigor to how did they come up with that number versus another number. And the challenge is the government as a whole, and the Air Force in particular, can't compete financially with the airlines. They just can't pay them the same salary that they would receive if they would separate from the Air Force. And so what they have done is come up with a number that they feel is reasonable, but something they can afford that would be attractive to pilots and their families to have them remain in the Air Force rather than separate.
One of the things that we've talked about in this conversation before, Larry, is you pointed out a number of times pilots join the Air Force or join an airline or wherever they go to fly and not to sit. Is that potentially an advantage now, as the airlines have been suffering from lack of demand because of the pandemic? Is that an advantage for maybe getting some of these pilots to re-up? If you stay in, you're going to continue to fly.
Yeah, there's no question. With the pandemic and the reduced flyership on airplanes, the airline industry overall has been suppressed. So clearly the demand for pilots right now is not as high as it was in the past. The challenge is, though, as I mentioned, these things are cyclical. We will get past the pandemic. In fact, most folks feel like we're on the downward trend of that, ending that now. We're on the other side of the mountain of the pandemic. So as the Air Force looks ahead, I think they're really doing a smart thing by getting in front of this issue rather than waiting for it to overtake it once the pandemic subsides.
Beyond the money and the opportunity to fly, are there things that the Air Force has done, or maybe you think should do, in order to continue to get pilots to stay in?
Yeah, the Air Force has worked very hard, as you know, to look at things like additional duties, things that pull pilots away from their primary job, things that they focus on every day. So I think the Air Force really is trying their best to make sure that pilots in other critical specialties, if you will, are allowed to focus on that specialty and sort of not get bogged down with sort of the extraneous things. But the other side of that is a pilot is also an officer in the Air Force. And so there's some training, leadership that they have to develop so they can be prepared for future leadership positions in the future. So I think there's a balance there, Francis, to making sure that pilots are able to devote most of their time to their craft, but at the same time, getting the training and experience they need to lead other pilots as they and others in the Air Force as they progress in their careers.
To the point about being able to fly, and that's why pilots sign up, one of the conversations during the readiness discussion that we had over the last 5-6 years or maybe longer was that pilots were not flying as much as they had signed up to or thought they were going to when they signed up. Do you see that getting better or worse as a result of the readiness discussion, as a result of budget discussions and so on? Is that potentially a challenge for the force moving forward?
I think it is a challenge. Obviously, we're all waiting with the new administration to see what the DoD budgets will look like going forward. But then, and this is my own view here now, you know, the Air Force has wrestled, I think, over the years with, you know, there are pilots who would come forward in the past and say, essentially, I just want to fly. I'm not worried about being a squadron commander, group commander, wing commander. I just want to fly. That's what I signed up for. And that has waxed and waned over the years because, again, over time, you want to groom these pilots not only to be operationally efficient and be the best pilots in the world like they are, but we need them to lead others going forward as they increase in rank. So one, I think with the increases in budgets recently, readiness in particular, I think that has helped pilots get more flying hours, more flying time, more stick time, if you will. I do think, though, going forward, it remains to be seen if future budgets will detract from that.
30 seconds left, Larry. Is the retention number the only number that matters, or are there other measures to pay attention to?
No, retention is always important, but it's the quality of the pilot, obviously. It's quality of all airmen. So we want airmen to stay, but we want only the best airmen to stay. And so I think it's not only retention, but the quality of the pilots as well.
General Spencer, thanks very much as always. Great to have you back.
Thank you so much for having me.